Hello everyone. Today, you'll hear the 1800s breathe. Not the kind of breathing that fills textbooks or oil paintings. No. This is the slow, aching breath of an era caught between candlelight and machine, between law and spectacle, between justice and something much colder. You walk in softly, as if entering a quiet room at dusk. The lamps flicker. The sky's gone from grey to black in the time it took you to lace your boots. In this world, it's the end of the day. And that's when the whispers begin. The 19th century doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It tightens its grip quietly. And tonight, it wants to show you how it punished those who dared to step outside the lines, or simply stood in the wrong place, at the wrong hour. You might expect cobblestones, gaslight, the clink of chains. You'll get all that. But first, I want you to pause. Close your eyes, just for a moment, and imagine the way fear travels through a crowd, not as a scream, but as a ripple, a tension behind the spine, a glance over the shoulder, a breath held too long. Now open them. You're standing in a street that doesn't have a name. It's somewhere between Liverpool and Lisbon, New Orleans and Naples, Boston and Bogota. Because cruelty, organized, elegant, state-approved cruelty, did not wear a single flag in the 1800s. It wore a uniform, a face, a stage, and a rope. It's morning. Or is it twilight? The fog makes it hard to tell. Around you, buildings lean inward, as if they're ashamed of what they've seen. People pass without speaking. There's a quietness in the way they walk, like something sacred, or shameful, is about to happen. You feel it too, that strange pull behind your navel, a knowing, because this is a world that punishes out loud. Let's begin here, in the breath before the act. You are not noble, you are not powerful, you are ordinary. And that's exactly what made you vulnerable in the 1800s. This was a time when class wasn't a concept, it was a cage, where skin color, birthplace, gender, or accent could change your sentence before a judge ever opened his mouth. A world in which theft could mean death, where children were jailed for picking pockets, where women were whipped for speaking out of turn, where prisons were not places of correction, but holding pens for pain. And yet, they said it was order. They said it was justice. You walk past a broadsheet posted to a wall, printed in black ink, curling at the corners from the morning dew. It lists the punishments for the week. Names, crimes, times. The ink smells sharp, almost metallic. One name, you think, looks familiar, but you keep walking. Because in this world, curiosity could be dangerous. Let's look closer at how punishment worked in the 1800s. It wasn't just about law, it was about display. The spectacle of punishment was part of its power, to show, to humiliate, to make people remember. And not just the criminal, but the onlooker. Punishment was a performance that cast its audience as both witness and accomplice. There were 3 stages to every public punishment. First, the announcement, usually delivered by town crier, bellman, or posted sheets. It served 2 purposes, to notify and to intimidate. To let everyone know what had been done, and what would happen in response. Second, the gathering. Crowds didn't stumble into punishments, they were drawn to them. In small towns, the square filled early. In cities, people flocked to scaffoldings like they were opera houses. Vendors sold apples, children tugged at sleeves. And all the while, the mood hung somewhere between festival and funeral. Third, the act. This was the heart of it, the punishment itself. And depending on the era, the country, and the crime, it could range from whipping to branding, from time in the stocks to public hanging. The goal wasn't only to hurt, it was to scar minds, bodies, memories. One more step back, to the air around you. It's thick, almost sour, There's a bakery 2 streets over, but even its warmth can't cover the scent of iron and damp stone. Punishment has a smell. It lives in the grain of wood soaked by old blood, in the linen of uniforms stained by routine. And yet, people came, day after day, week after week, because fear becomes routine, and routine becomes culture. You approach a woman standing near the square. Her shawl is pulled tight against the wind. Her son, maybe 7 years old, watches the scaffold with eyes too old for his face. She doesn't stop him. She doesn't cover his eyes. Because in her mind, this is education. That's something we often forget. Punishment in the 1800s wasn't only for the guilty, it was for the crowd. To teach, to mold, to intimidate, to remind. These moments were meant to burn themselves into the minds of those who watched, like branding on skin. It was, in a sense, a sermon. The church had taught eternal punishment. The state delivered something more immediate, tangible, loud. In France, it was the guillotine, fast, clean, mechanized. In England, the gallows, often portable, wheeled into place with dreadful ceremony. In the American South, whippings and mutilation, especially for the enslaved. In parts of Latin America, hangings in public plazas, bodies left dangling for hours under a sun too bright for grief. Each region had its methods, its symbols. But the goal was always the same, submission. And so you watch, as they once did. A man is led forward. His crime is petty, maybe theft, or drunkenness, or speaking against a local official. But the punishment is not petty. It's deliberate, measured. His shirt is torn, his wrists bound. A sign hangs from his neck. Thief, or blasphemer, or runaway. The crowd shifts. Whispers flicker like candlelight. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else spits. And the punishment begins. You don't need to see every lash to feel it. The sound alone is enough. Sharp, wet, rhythmic. Like music, if music could scream. The man tries not to cry out. He fails. His voice cracks, breaks, rises, then drops into a silence that feels heavier than sound. And yet, no one moves. Not because they agree, but because they've seen it before. And they'll see it again. That's the terrible power of routine. It smooths the sharp edges of cruelty, makes it manageable, acceptable, normal. The punishment ends, not with apology, not with reflection, but with the creak of wood, the shuffle of boots, the dismissal of a job done. The man is dragged, or walks, away, and the crowd dissolves. No applause, no outrage, just the quiet rhythm of a world that believed this was right. You stand there a moment longer. Your hands are cold. Your breath comes slow. You don't feel tired, not yet, but you do feel weighted, like something has shifted inside you. Not broken, just remembered. Because what they called justice in the 1800s, we might call something else today. Abuse, terror, spectacle, or maybe just the fear of stepping out of line in a world that had very specific ideas of where you belonged. And yet, they thought it worked. They believed it kept order, that it maintained the fabric of society. That fear was a price worth paying for peace. Were they wrong? Or have we simply learned to punish differently? But that question can wait. For now, dim the lights. Let this feeling settle, like dust, like memory, like fog rolling over an empty square at night. We're only beginning. You return to the square. You're not alone, and that's the point. No one was ever alone in these moments. Public punishment wasn't meant to be intimate. It was meant to be witnessed, remembered, whispered about the next morning, retold for years. The square isn't quiet, but it's not noisy either. It has that hush that cities get before something begins. Before fireworks, before parades, before the sky darkens. There's movement, yes, but it's careful, controlled, as if the entire town has agreed to hold its breath in slow motion. The scaffold stands at the center, not tall, but tall enough. Its wood is worn smooth from use, though no one speaks about that. You see the bolts holding it together, the dark lines where blood has soaked in and dried over and over again, until the grain itself forgets its original color. You step closer, not in a rush. There's no rush here. Punishment in the 1800s was never hurried. It was deliberate, rhythmic, like a clock ticking, like a sermon building toward its final verse. The townspeople are gathering now. The old man with the crooked spine has brought his stool. He always sits in the same spot, they say, right beneath the baker's window. A young woman balances her child on her hip, her face unreadable. Two boys climb a barrel for a better view. They're laughing, but it's nervous. Laughter with edges. And you, in the midst of them all. No one acknowledges one another. Not out loud. But there's a shared understanding. This is part of life. Just as sure as sunrise. The church bell tolls once. Then again. A rhythm forms. The event is near. You think about how different this is from your world, where justice is hidden behind locked doors and televised trials, where silence is part of the process. Here, in the 1800s, justice was loud, and it needed you to watch. Without your eyes, it lost its sting. Without your memory, it had no echo. There's a name for that. Punishment as theatre. Let's call this performance what it truly was. Choreographed suffering, carefully crafted to achieve an emotional response, but not compassion. Not sorrow, fear. That was the currency. That was the goal. Because fear stays with you, longer than pain, deeper than shame. It embeds itself into your habits, your choices, your silences. That's what public punishment wanted most. Not the correction of the guilty, but the obedience of the innocent. You look toward the platform. A set of steps leads upward. Each board creaks under weight. They've been reinforced again and again, because wood warps under repeated strain, and these steps have borne hundreds. No one says how many. You notice something else now. The soldiers, 4 of them, standing at corners, rigid as fence posts, not threatening, not yet, but unmistakably present. Their uniforms are pressed, boots polished, rifles at ease but ready, authority in flesh. Then, the crowd parts, the condemned approaches. He's young, maybe 25, maybe less. His clothes are stained, not by blood, not yet, but by life. Mud clings to his trousers. A tear in his collar shows the threadbare fabric beneath. His hands are bound in front of him, wrists red from the rope. He walks like someone who hasn't decided whether he's awake or dreaming. Steps uncertain, eyes too wide. The guards don't push him. They don't have to. The silence is pushing him enough. He steps up. The executioner stands near the center of the scaffold. You expected a mask, but there isn't one. Just a plain face. Serious, professional, like a craftsman ready to begin his work. He checks the knots on the post, adjusts the leather straps. Everything is routine. And now someone reads. A clerk. Thin, voice steady. He reads the charges aloud. Theft of grain, attempted escape, insolence. Each word lands heavy like a drumbeat. There's no rebuttal, no lawyer, no defense. That was earlier. Or perhaps never. Now only the sentence matters. 20 lashes. To be administered publicly, with witnesses. You're one of them. That's when time slows. The prisoner is positioned, shirt removed, back exposed, pale skin crisscrossed with old scars. This is not his first punishment, but perhaps his last in this town. The executioner selects his whip. Leather, split-tipped, weighted. Its handle is worn smooth. You wonder how many times it's been held. And then, the first strike. You don't need to see it to feel it. The sound is enough. A sharp crack, like thunder in miniature. The crowd shifts, but no one speaks. The man flinches, but does not cry out. His shoulders tense. Another strike, then another. The rhythm builds. Not fast, never fast. That would be mercy. This is slow, purposeful. Each lash separated by seconds, long enough for the pain to land, long enough for the lesson to sink into the crowd. Somewhere near you, a woman turns her face, but she doesn't leave. Children watch. Some fidget. Some are stone still. You wonder what they'll remember years from now, the man's face or the sound of the whip. By the 10th strike, blood is visible. By the 15th, he can barely stand. The final 5 are delivered with the same measured calm. No escalation, just procedure, precision, and then silence. The executioner steps back. A doctor appears briefly to ensure he is alive. There is no treatment, only confirmation. The prisoner is unbound. His shirt is returned, or what remains of it. 2 guards help him down. He stumbles, then walks. The crowd parts again. No applause, no protest. Just the rustle of movement as people return to their errands, their work, their lives. You remain. Not because you're stronger, but because something inside you refuses to turn away just yet. You look at the stains on the platform, at the discarded rope, at the marks left behind, not just on the man's back, but on the wood, the day, the town. This is how the 1800s punished, not in secrecy, but in full view, so that every citizen would carry a piece of it, a sliver of fear lodged between their ribs, enough to keep them obedient, enough to keep them quiet, and maybe, just maybe, enough to pass it on. The question lingers like smoke. What would it take for you to forget this? And deeper still, what would it take for you to accept it as normal? But those are questions for another time. For now, let the image fade, the platform empty, the square quiet, the sky unchanged. And you, still breathing, you stay in the square longer than you expected. Most people leave quickly. Some have errands. Some simply don't want to remember what they just witnessed. But you stay, not out of curiosity, but out of something quieter, something that feels like duty, as if bearing witness is the least you can do. The scaffold, now empty, looks smaller somehow, less powerful without the performance, but the echoes linger. You can still feel the weight of silence, the collective stillness of the crowd. It's as if the square itself is holding its breath, waiting for the next name to be called. Because there will be a next. There always is. But let's shift now, not away from the violence, but behind it. Let's step off the stage and into the shadows, because not all punishments were administered with crowds and applause. Many were quieter, longer, infinitely more suffocating. Welcome to the prison. If the scaffold was the public face of justice in the 1800s, the prison was its shadow, its underbelly, its backstage. Imagine it now, a stone building crouched against a city's edge, almost ashamed of itself. Iron bars behind cracked windows, damp air clinging to the walls like old breath. Inside, a maze of corridors dimly lit by lanterns that flicker too often. Everything smells of mildew, human waste, and something metallic. A hint of blood that never quite washes away. You enter with care. Your boots echo in the narrow hallway. The floor is uneven, damp from leaks in the ceiling. The walls are too close, too cold, too... watching. Cells line both sides, each no larger than a pantry, some smaller. Inside, straw on the floor, a bucket in the corner, maybe a blanket. Maybe. No beds, no windows, and always the sound of someone coughing, someone sobbing, someone muttering prayers to a God who might not hear. And the smell. It hits you harder than the sight. Unwashed skin, urine, mold, rot. It doesn't just fill your nose. It gets into your clothes, into your mouth. It's the kind of smell that follows you home. And the prisoners? They don't move when you pass. They've learned not to. Motion is risk. Attention is danger. Some lie still, staring at the ceiling. Some whisper things you can't understand. One rocks back and forth, muttering the same word over and over. You don't ask what it means. In the 1800s, prisons weren't designed for reform. They were designed for removal, to take people away from society, not to fix them, but to forget them. You see one cell with 4 people inside. There's barely room for 2. They sleep in shifts. Their limbs overlap like furniture in a crowded attic. One has a wound on his leg. It smells infected. No one looks at it. You pass a door marked solitary. They say some people come out different. They say some don't come out at all. Solitary confinement in this era wasn't just separation. It was sensory starvation. Days without light, without voice, without the sound of your own footsteps. Sometimes, the only time you'd hear another person was when the food was slid through the hatch. And even then, it wasn't food. Not really. Bread, water, maybe gruel. And time stretched like damp cloth. Minutes like hours. Days like fog. Prisoners marked days with scratches on the wall until they lost count. Until the wall looked back with 1,000 tiny wounds. You reach the end of the hall. There's a small room. A guard station maybe, a chair, a desk, a whip hanging on the wall like a reminder. Paperwork scattered across the surface. One page catches your eye. Offense, insolence, sentence, 2 days in chains, bread and water. That's all. Just that. And suddenly it's not hard to imagine how easy it was to end up here. How fragile the boundary was between freedom and punishment. Say the wrong thing, be in the wrong place, refuse to bow. Refuse to run, refuse to smile, and suddenly, you're not a person, you're a problem, a number, a sentence on a page. Outside the prison, the world keeps turning. Markets open, horses trot, newspapers print. But inside these walls, time doesn't move. Not really. It sinks, it settles, it stiffens in the joints. And hope doesn't live here. Not easily, because most prisoners didn't know when, or if, they'd leave. Some were sentenced for years. Some were held pending trial for decades. Some were forgotten entirely. Their names faded from records. Their stories ended in silence. You find a ledger in one corner. Names, ages, crimes. Some are children. 12, 10. One just marked, girl. You close the book, not out of respect, out of grief. These weren't criminals, not all of them. Many were just poor, or sick, or inconvenient. Mental illness wasn't treated, it was locked away. Women who spoke too loudly, men who refused orders, orphans, vagrants, anyone who didn't fit. Because the prison wasn't about guilt, it was about order, about making the streets cleaner by making these cells fuller. You leave the building slowly, not because you want to, but because the weight of the air inside has become unbearable. Outside, the square feels different now. You thought you understood punishment when you saw the lash, when you heard the crowd. But this slow, rotting erasure, this is punishment too. No audience, no blood, just forgetting, just waiting. You sit on the edge of the fountain. The water is green, barely moving. A boy throws a pebble in and watches the ripples, then runs off. You close your eyes. Behind your eyelids, you still see the corridor, still hear the cough, still smell the damp straw. And it stays with you, because now you understand. Punishment in the 1800s didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it just waited. And sometimes, the worst times, it wore your name. You wake from the memory slowly. The scent of the prison clings to your mind. The damp, the decay, the silence. But the air in the square is different now. Still cold, still heavy, but fresher somehow. as if the world has moved slightly forward. And yet, punishment waits again. It always does. This time, the square has a different energy, less somber, more anticipatory. You hear it in the way boots shuffle on the stones, the way whispers skip across the crowd like wind over leaves. Today is no mere flogging. No hours in stocks. No quiet chains behind stone walls. Today is execution, and the air knows it. It's early. The sky still wearing its dawn colours, a pale grey-blue brushed with streaks of pink. The scaffold has been rebuilt slightly, raised higher than usual. A black cloth hangs along the sides, not to shield the act, but to dress it, like a stage. Because it is a stage. That's something many people forget. Executions in the 1800s were events, not hidden, not ashamed. They were scheduled, announced, anticipated. You see a boy selling bread nearby, another hawking folded broadsheets, condemned man's final words, printed hours before he speaks. People line the buildings, some hang from windows. A woman holds a child too young to understand. An old man chews slowly on a pipe, the smoke curling upward as if to avoid what's coming. And in the centre the structure stands, wooden, tall, unmoving. It's not always a gallows. Sometimes it's a guillotine. Sometimes a block and axe. In some colonies, worse still. Rope, bullet, blade. The methods varied by country, class, and custom. But the purpose remained, to eliminate the body while preserving the fear. Today, it's the gallows. You notice the details, the knot already tied, hanging just so, the lever half hidden beneath the platform, the trapdoor sealed shut, for now. A priest climbs the stairs. He doesn't look around. He's done this before. He clutches a book in one hand, gestures with the other, murmurs words only a few can hear. They aren't meant for the crowd. They're meant for the condemned. And then, he comes. Led by two guards, he walks slowly, his hands bound in front. He wears a coat, but it's open, revealing a white shirt stained with sweat and dust. He stumbles once. The guard doesn't stop him from falling, but helps him up when he does. You can see his face now, and it's not what you expect. Not terror, not calm. Something in between. A resignation too old for his years. He looks at no one, not the crowd, not the sky, not the priest. Only the steps. One by one he climbs. The rope sways slightly as he passes beneath it, like it recognizes him. The executioner is already in place. A large man, face blank. No mask today. His hands are bare. He nods once. The knot is adjusted. The prisoner is placed just so. The rope over his shoulder. The noose tightened beneath his ear. Someone in the crowd coughs. Someone else prays. The priest leans in, whispers something, a blessing, a comfort, or a reminder. Then, the question, "Do you have any last words?" The man opens his mouth. Nothing comes. He tries again. This time, he speaks, quietly. Not to the crowd, to himself, to the air, to the memory of someone who isn't there. And then, he stops. The priest steps back. The executioner nods once more. A lever is pulled, and silence becomes sound. The trapdoor opens with a thud. The body drops, and time folds in on itself. You don't realize you've been holding your breath until the sound hits you. The creak of the rope, the thump of boots against wood, the gasp of a child, the murmur of the crowd folding inward. The body swings, then stills. The man is dead. And yet the performance continues. Because execution wasn't just about death. It was about showing death, making it real, making it close. The executioner checks the pulse. The priest crosses himself. A clerk records the time. The crowd watches. Some weep, some cheer. Some say nothing at all. The body is left hanging for a time. Not long, just enough. long enough for the image to stick, for every face to carry home a shadow of the morning. You walk slowly now, not away, not yet, around the scaffold. You want to understand what people felt, what they thought, not just those punished, but those watching. So you ask yourself, why would people come? Why bring children? Why make this part of life? And the answer is bitter, because fear, when taught early, roots deep, because seeing pain done to another affirms your own safety, or at least your place, because the spectacle distracts from hunger, from oppression, from your own fragility, because punishment in the 1800s was not just correction, it was theatre, it was lesson, it was relief, it was control. And now, as the crowd thins and the gallows creak in the rising sun, you understand. No one here came to see justice. They came to see order restored, to see the line reinforced, to see the rope. You turn to leave. The morning is fully here now. Vendors open their stalls. A cart rolls by with milk. Children play a game with stones near the base of the scaffold, and the shadow of the rope falls across their laughter. This is how the 1800s punished, not just with blood, but with memory. You don't return to the gallows, not today. The memory of the rope is still fresh, the swaying, the silence, the unblinking eyes of those who watched. You carry it like a stone in your pocket. You don't feel ready to add more weight. But punishment in the 1800s doesn't wait for readiness. It continues, around corners, behind doors, in courtyards where the ground still holds the memory of blood. Today, you follow the sound of wood cracking against flesh. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Not frantic, not chaotic, deliberate. You're in a smaller town now, one with fewer people but no less resolve. The square here isn't as grand, but it's just as exposed. Children run barefoot through dusty alleys. A dog lies in the shade of a bakery window. Life moves slowly here, except when the lash is in use. The whipping post stands alone near the courthouse. Simple, a thick wooden beam mounted to stone, with iron cuffs halfway up. There's no scaffold, no ceremony. Just a space cleared by time and tradition. And pain. You arrive to find a man already bound, his arms stretched outward, wrists locked in place, shirt removed. His back is lean, the skin pale and marked with old scars. He doesn't struggle, not visibly, but you can see the tightness in his fingers, the tension in his spine. He knows what's coming. The crowd here is smaller, maybe 30 people. No vendors, no newspapers, just townsfolk, farmers, carpenters, mothers with quiet faces. No one is smiling. This is punishment without performance, without the grandeur of death, without the finale. This is discipline, routine, order. A constable steps forward, whip in hand. Not a cat o' nine tails today, just a single long leather lash. Still brutal, still efficient. There's no speech, no reading of crimes. Everyone already knows. Theft, maybe. Insult. Refusal to bow to a local official. The details don't matter anymore. What matters is the count, 20 lashes. And it begins. The first strike is sharp. The man jerks forward. His body resists, but the cuffs hold him firm. A pause. Then another strike. You flinch. Not from the sound, though that's bad enough, but from the change in the air, the way silence deepens after each lash, as if the world inhales but never exhales. Strike 3. A line of red appears. Strike 4. The man groans, a low guttural sound that cuts through the dust like a blade. You've heard that sound before, not in life, in memory. In instinct, it's the sound of a body remembering it is vulnerable. You look around. Some avert their eyes, some do not. One boy, no older than 9, stares wide-eyed. His mother rests a hand on his shoulder, but doesn't cover his view. Because this is how you learn. Not in books, but in blood. Strike 7. Now the welts rise, swollen, angry. The whip lands just above the last, crossing them, deepening them. The executioner, though no one calls him that here, maintains the rhythm. 1 every 5 seconds, a breath between each. The man's breathing grows loud. He gasps, but doesn't scream. That will change. Strike 9. Now the skin begins to break. Small cuts at first, thin, almost surgical. But they widen, they weep. Strike 11. A scream, brief, uncontrolled. It startles a bird from the eaves. The constable pauses, not out of mercy, out of habit. He adjusts his grip, rolls his shoulders, and begins again. Strike 12. You wonder how the body can continue to absorb such pain, how it doesn't simply collapse, but it does continue, because it has no choice. This is the cruelty of the whip. It doesn't kill, it disciplines, it molds, it teaches. Strike 15. Now the man sags in the cuffs. His knees buckle, but he doesn't fall. The iron holds him. His head droops. Blood streaks his back, some dried, some fresh. His skin shivers with each breeze. Strike 17. He sobs now. Not from shame. Shame left him long ago. This is animal pain. Pure, wordless. Strike 18. The whip lands across the base of the spine, a dangerous place. The crowd murmurs. Some feel it may have gone too far. Strike 19. One more. The constable hesitates, just briefly, then finishes. Strike 20. It lands on top of the first, a full circle. The lash falls silent. The man hangs in the cuffs, unmoving, alive, barely. 2 guards approach. Gently, they unfasten the locks. The man slumps. One lifts him by the arms. They walk him away, not carried, but not quite walking either. A ghost of a man, a lesson in flesh. And the crowd, they disperse, quietly, thoughtfully. Some look at the post one last time, some do not. But all remember, you approach the beam. It smells of sweat, blood, iron. Deep in the grain of the wood, you see old stains, some dark, some pale. The wood has been cleaned many times, but some things never wash out. You rest a hand against it. It's still warm. The question returns. Why did they do this? And the answer is the same. Because pain changes behavior. Because spectacle fades. But scars do not. Because when you whip a man, you whip everyone watching, not their skin, but their certainty, their comfort, their illusions. And that's the point. You leave slowly. The wind shifts, the sky turns. Somewhere, a church bell rings for the next hour. But here, in your memory, the lash still sings. It always will. You return to the same square the next morning. The air has shifted. It always does after a public punishment. Not in temperature. The wind still carries the same scent of dust and distant firewood. But in tone. In texture. Like the world is trying to forget what it just allowed. But punishment in the 1800s wasn't meant to be forgotten. It was meant to remain. In bruises. In scars. In whispers that rippled through streets like loose thread through cloth. You stand near the whipping post again, just as the sun begins to rise. There's no one here yet, no crowd, no guards, no victim. Only the post itself, standing tall like a silent witness. The wood still bears the memory of yesterday's pain. And if you look closely, you can see the fibers of the lash embedded in the base. The faintest trace of blood along the iron rings. Nothing here heals quickly. A boy approaches, barefoot, clothes torn, maybe 10 years old. He stops a few feet away and stares at the post like it's a person. Or maybe something worse. He doesn't speak to you, but he nods, just once, then walks away. You wonder how many times he's watched. How many times he's been told, behave. Or else. You sit on the edge of the stone fountain nearby where water trickles in a tired rhythm. As you rest, the square slowly comes alive again. Vendors set up carts. A baker opens shutters. A woman sweeps her doorway. Life resumes, because it must. But the pain, the memory, that stays, and today it will be renewed. Another punishment is scheduled. Another body will learn what leather feels like when it's swung with intent. You ask someone nearby, a man with grey hair and hands like tools, who it will be. He shrugs. Vagrancy, he says. Just that. No name, no backstory, just a charge. In the 1800s, vagrancy was a catch-all offence. Too poor? Vagrant. No home? Vagrant. Sleeping in the wrong place, wearing the wrong coat, carrying no papers? Vagrant. Poverty was not just a hardship, it was a crime. And so, the cycle continues. Midday arrives. The post is cleaned, quickly, mechanically, the same way a butcher wipes his knife between cuts. A constable stands nearby, whip coiled at his side like a sleeping snake. The crowd gathers again. Different faces this time, or maybe the same, older now by a day of knowing. Children don't giggle today. They remember. The condemned man is brought forward. He's older, thin, bearded. His clothes hang from his frame like wet curtains. You can't tell if he's angry, afraid, or simply beyond feeling. He says nothing. Not when they strip off his coat. Not when they bind his wrists. Not even when they tie the gag between his teeth. That's new. Yesterday, the man was allowed to scream. Today, they want silence. The constable steps forward. This whip is different, broader, thicker. It's designed not to slice, but to bruise, to rupture tissue, to leave deep pain, not just surface agony. The first lash lands with a dull thud, not a crack, a thump. The man's knees buckle. He groans behind the gag. The sound is low, intimate, like breath escaping a dying animal. Again, and again, and again. You lose count. They don't announce the number today. Just keep going until the flesh begins to darken, swell, split. The gag grows wet. The man's eyes widen, not with shock, but with something worse. Recognition. Recognition of this pain. Recognition of how long it might last. Recognition that this is not about him anymore. It's about the crowd. The boy you saw earlier stands nearby now. He clutches a piece of bread, doesn't eat it, just holds it. His eyes fixed on the man's back. You realize he's memorizing the shape of each wound. And maybe that's the real purpose. This isn't just punishment, it's education. You leave the square early this time, not because you've seen enough, but because you already know how it ends. The man will collapse. He will be carried away. Someone will mutter that he deserved it. Someone else will wonder what he did exactly. And then, the world will resume. But you carry the image with you. The shape of his back. The sound of bruises blooming. The taste of silence when no one speaks out. Later that evening, you visit the town infirmary. It's barely more than a room. A cot. A basin. A shelf of cloth and tincture. The punished man lies on the cot, barely conscious. The doctor, an old woman with hands that never tremble, tends to his back. She works quietly, pouring water, applying salve. Her face unreadable. You ask her why she still helps. She shrugs. Because he's still human, she says. And then she adds, almost as an afterthought, and so am I. That night, you lie in a rented room above the inn. The mattress is thin. The walls hum with wind. And as you drift towards sleep, you hear it again. Thump, thump, thump. Not real, just memory, but real enough to bruise. Because in the 1800s, punishment didn't end when the lash stopped. It followed you, through the crowd, through your meals, through your dreams. It became part of the architecture of the day. Invisible, unspoken, but always there. You wake to rain, not the kind that lashes the earth, but the slow kind, misty, constant, soaking into cloth and stone alike. The kind of rain that blurs the edges of things, as if the world is trying to wash itself clean, but doesn't quite know how. The square is quieter today, not empty, never empty, but subdued. The whipping post stands alone, its shadow long and curved like a question mark. You don't go to it this time, not yet. Because today, the story moves sideways, into another courtyard, another place where punishment is given, but differently, less visibly, less memorably. At least for those who weren't on the receiving end. Today, you step into the world of punishment for women, and it is cruel in ways that differ from rope and blade, because the punishments women faced in the 1800s weren't just about pain. They were about shame, they were about control, and most of all, about silence. The building you enter is low and stone-built, with thick wooden doors and no windows at eye level. It's not a prison, exactly, not officially. It's called a house of correction, or, depending on the country, a Magdalene asylum, a charity home, a moral institution. The name didn't matter. The purpose was always the same: to punish women who had transgressed, not necessarily the law, but the expectations. You're led down a corridor that smells of bleach and old cloth. A matron meets you there. Her uniform is plain, her mouth tight. She doesn't smile. She doesn't greet you. She just says, "You may look, but don't interfere." And then the doors open. Inside, silence. Women in grey uniforms scrub floors with rags. Others sew endlessly. Garments, underclothes, handkerchiefs, for a store they will never enter. No one speaks. Their eyes are lowered. Some are older. Their faces lined. Their hands raw. But many are young. Very young. Girls, really. And all of them are here for something that, in another time, in another place, wouldn't even warrant a scolding. Theft. Disobedience. Pregnancy out of wedlock. Too loud. Too proud. Too visible. One woman, perhaps in her 30s, carries a mark on her forehead, a faint discoloration in the shape of a letter. You don't ask, you don't need to. Branding wasn't just for cattle. In some countries, women accused of adultery, prostitution, or moral deviation were publicly marked, sometimes with iron, sometimes with ink, sometimes with the words of others passed like poison from tongue to ear. You see another woman scrubbing a wall with a wire brush. There's no dirt on the wall. The punishment is the scrubbing itself. Endless, pointless, painful. That's what punishment for women often was. Work without purpose. Pain without spectacle. Suffering made invisible so that society could forget it was happening. You're led to another room, smaller, darker. Here, women are restrained, not by chains, but by tasks. One kneels for hours, not in prayer, but to hold a heavy book overhead. If her arms drop, she is whipped, not publicly, but thoroughly. Another is forced to wear a dunce cap, not for failing in studies, but for impertinence. Her crime? Saying she didn't want to marry the man her father chose. There is no trial. There never was. Women were punished through isolation, through erasure, through labor, through humiliation, through their bodies, but not always through blood. And that made it harder to see, harder to name, harder to stop. You exit the institution in silence. Even the rain seems to respect the hush. Outside, in the alley, you see two boys arguing. One kicks the other. They run. You think of the girls inside, how they'd be locked away for less. And it hits you. Punishment wasn't just gendered. It was calculated. Designed not only to correct behavior, but to reinforce structure. To remind women of their place and punish them when they forgot it. Later, in the evening, you speak to a laundress. She's free now, older, grey streaks in her hair, a scar across one cheek. She once spent a year in a correctional home. Her crime? Being found on the street after curfew. You ask her what it was like. She doesn't answer right away. Then she says, "Imagine the world forgetting your name. but making sure you never forgot what you did. And that's the sentence, isn't it? Not the lash, not the chains, but the echo. The echo of guilt, of shame, of punishment, crafted not just to hurt, but to erase. That night, you hear singing. Soft, distant, off-key, a girl's voice. You follow it and find her in the alley beside the inn. She sits alone, arms around her knees, humming something old. You ask her name. She says nothing, but she smiles, just a little. And for a moment, you wonder if that's defiance, or hope, or both. And then you realize, sometimes survival is the loudest rebellion of all. You've stood with the crowd, you've heard the lash, you've smelled the iron tang of punishment in the air. You've seen the condemned let out, and sometimes, though not always, brought back in. But until now you haven't asked, who delivers the pain? Because punishments do not carry themselves out. They require hands, and hearts, and decisions. And so today, you walk behind the curtain, behind the uniforms, into the lives of those whose job it was to enforce the punishments of the 1800s. You begin at dawn. A knock at a small wooden door. A sleepy grunt from within. Boots shuffle. The door opens. He's older than you expected. A lined face, heavy eyes. He rubs his chin and nods. You're the one asking questions. He is the town's whipman, has been for 27 years. He doesn't call himself that, though. To him, he's simply doing the work. He lets you in, offers tea. His house smells of oil and boiled cloth. There are no children, no pictures, just a coat, a Bible, and a shelf of tools. Cleaned, oiled, ordered. You ask him why he started. He shrugs. Someone had to. That's a common phrase you'll learn. Among whipmen, guards, executioners, the ones who held the rope, who read the verdict, who carved the punishment into flesh, that's their chorus. Someone had to. You ask if he ever felt guilt. He doesn't answer right away. Then he says, "The first time I dropped the whip, my hand just stopped working." The man screamed anyway. I thought maybe I didn't have to swing it after all. But they made me. Told me if I couldn't, they'd find someone who could. He sips his tea. I learned to swing it properly the second time. And that's what strikes you. Not cruelty, not pleasure, but routine. A quiet surrender to the role. He tells you about the rules, the angles, how to make the lash sing without killing, how to miss the spine, how to draw blood without tearing muscle, how to keep count. It's a craft, and like all crafts, it's passed down. He was trained by a man named Dalton. Dalton once flogged 50 men in one morning. His wrist never failed, the old whipman says, almost reverently. You ask what happened to Dalton. He went blind, he replies, said it was the Lord's way of giving him back all the faces he tried to forget. He smiles, but not kindly. Next, you visit the guardhouse. Different energy here. Younger men, sharper eyes, jokes, whistles, but underneath, tension. These are the watchers, the ones who keep the cells, walk the corridors, chain the wrists, feed the mouths, beat the disobedient. Drag the bodies. Their uniform carries weight, not just on the shoulders, but in the posture. There's a stiffness to how they walk, how they speak, like the job never quite lets go. You talk to one of them, a man named Harris. He's 35, 2 kids, been a prison guard for 11 years. He shows you the records, the feeding schedule, the punishment logs. We don't just hurt them, he says. We contain them. They're dangerous. You ask what he means. Some scream for hours, he says. Others talk to walls. You wouldn't last a week in there. It changes them. You ask if it changes him. He pauses. I used to sleep fine, then adds, not anymore. But the most complex figure, the one who haunts this part of history like a shadow, is the executioner. He does not live in town. Often he's summoned, paid, protected, shunned. Sometimes he's even masked, not for ceremony, but for safety. You find one willing to speak. His name is Benoit. French, older now, retired. He performed executions across 3 countries. Rope, blade, gun. He has tried them all. You ask him how it feels to take a life. His voice is soft. No one takes it, he says. We end what's already been taken. You ask what he means. The state takes it first, he explains. With a verdict, with ink, with time. I just complete the equation. He keeps a journal, not of names, of eyes. I always look into them, he says. Right before. Doesn't matter how strong they were, how cruel. There's always a flicker. Of fear. No, he says, of memory. Like they're watching their life close from the inside. You ask why he agreed to speak with you. He hands you a paper, a list, dates, cities, crimes, methods. The last line reads, "And then I went home." You ask what he did at home. He looks at you and says, "I kiss my daughter goodnight." What do these men have in common? Not ideology, not sadism, but compartmentalization. A skill as sharp as any knife. They carry their work in separate boxes, the lash, the key, the verdict, the trapdoor, and outside those boxes, meals, children, sleep, church. Because to them, punishment was a job, not justice, not vengeance, just work. And yet, they remember, all of them, the cries, the eyes, the ones who begged, the ones who refused. They remember names they don't speak, scars they didn't cause directly, but shaped with their silence. You leave their world with a question lodged in your ribs. When we punish with systems, who do we make of the people who carry it out? And deeper still, what kind of world requires so many hands to hold the whip? As you walk back into the town, dusk rolls over the rooftops like a soft grey blanket. The air carries the sound of a bell, distant and tired. And beneath it all, a silence remains. Not of peace, but of pause. Because tomorrow, someone will read a name, someone will tighten a knot. And someone else, someone quiet, someone tired, will do what needs to be done. Because someone always has to. You see it posted on a wall, a single sheet of thick paper nailed crookedly to the side of a tavern. The rain has softened its edges, and someone has underlined a name with coal. It reads, Thomas Hill, age 16, sentenced to death by hanging for the theft of 1 loaf of bread. You stop, you read it again, and you wonder if it's a mistake, but it's not. In the 1800s, it never was. Because this was an age where petty crimes received punishments designed not to match the crime, but to make sure the memory of it never left you, or anyone watching. And that's what today is about. Not the great scandals, not murderers or conspirators, but the ones who slipped, ever so slightly, across the invisible line of acceptable and were devoured by the machine for it. You walk toward the courthouse. Inside, a clerk lets you read through a ledger. It's handwritten, each line cramped, methodical, resigned. You trace your finger down the page and begin to see it. A woman sentenced to 6 months hard labour for stealing a shawl. A boy imprisoned for a year for picking pockets in the market. A man sentenced to 20 lashes for loitering suspiciously. A girl, aged 12, locked away for disruptive conduct in a place of worship. Somewhere between the ink and the dust, it becomes clear. The crime was never the true offence. Poverty was. Or defiance, or visibility. You step outside and imagine the boy, Thomas Hill, the one from the poster, just a loaf of bread. And yet, they tied a noose for him, built a scaffold, printed his name in ink, all for the sake of order. And somewhere, someone sold that same loaf again the next day. You head to the edge of town. That's where the poor tend to live, always just outside the respectable boundary. The houses are smaller, roofs patched, windows cloth draped. But they carry a life you didn't expect. Children chase chickens through puddles. Women hang laundry on lines that sag with wear. A man tunes a fiddle with cracked fingers. You meet Mary there. She's old. Her spine curves forward like someone protecting a memory. She was once whipped, publicly, for selling candles without a license. A small thing, a cold night, a decision made out of desperation. They told me it was theft, she says, because I didn't pay the tax. You ask what happened next. They tied me to the pole. I was 17. My father watched. My brother cried. They told me it was for my own good. She doesn't cry, but she does pause. Then she says, the worst part was going to church after. Everyone knew. No one said a word. But they looked at me like I was dirt, not even human, just a thing that had been corrected. You realize then that this was how the system stayed intact, not through the weight of justice, but through the performance of humiliation. Steal a handkerchief, be paraded through town with it pinned to your chest, speak back to an officer, spend a day in the stocks with passers-by encouraged to spit. Miss church too often? Lose your job, your home, your place. And behind it all, always, a thin paper trail of justification. Because in the 1800s, punishment wasn't just about what you did. It was about who you were allowed to be. You walk back into town with that thought pulsing like a heartbeat. On the way, you pass a girl sitting on a stoop. She's barefoot, holding a wooden spoon like a scepter. She looks at you and says, "They took my brother." You ask why. "He took an apple." "Just one." She nods. "He was hungry." You ask what happened. "They shaved his head, then sent him away on a boat. Said it was better that way." Transportation. That was another punishment, wasn't it? For crimes too small to kill, too inconvenient to forgive. People sent to Australia, to penal colonies, for stealing sugar, or nails, or boots, often for life. And they called it mercy. You visit the shipping yard. The records office still holds copies of the names, age parchment curled at the edges. You read a few aloud to yourself. Samuel Bright, age 14, transported for stealing a handkerchief. Eliza Thorne, 19, transported for taking bread crusts from a bakery bin. John Pembroke, 24, transported for inciting laughter during church. Laughter, bread crusts, a scrap of cloth, and then a continent away. No return, no family, only the sound of ocean waves and chains clinking on decks. You sit with that. You sit with how small the offences were, and how massive the machinery of punishment became in response. And you wonder, what happens to a society that values its laws more than its people? And deeper still, what happens to the soul of a place that teaches its children they are worth less than a loaf of bread? At dusk, you return to the square, not for another punishment, but because it feels like the center of everything now. The circle where memory gathers and pain passes through like wind. You close your eyes, and you hear them, not the screams, but the justifications. The verdicts read aloud in quiet rooms, the ink drying on absurd sentences, the murmurs from those who watched and said nothing. You hear them all. And for a moment, it sounds like history is trying to apologize, but not very loudly, and not very well. You sit at the edge of the town square, where the stones are uneven and worn down by centuries of hesitant footsteps. Around you, the world moves as it always does. Carts roll, merchants haggle, children chase each other in lazy loops. But beneath it all, something pulses, something that no one says aloud. You feel it in the way people glance at corners before speaking, in the silence that falls when a constable walks by, in the way even laughter, when it comes, seems to check itself mid-air, as if afraid to be mistaken for defiance, that something is fear. And today, you begin to see it not as a reaction, but as a design. Fear in the 1800s wasn't accidental. It wasn't the byproduct of a brutal justice system. It was the foundation. It was what held the whole machine together. You start your morning with a visit to a local church, not because you're seeking comfort, but because you've heard, in whispers, that the pulpit was often where punishment began. Inside, the walls are high and grey. The windows stain the sunlight with images of saints and suffering. And in the front pew, a mother whispers warnings into her child's ear. You lean in just enough to hear, "If you steal, they'll tie your hands and break your back. God watches, and so do they. So do they. The constables, the magistrates, the informants, the neighbours." You begin to understand. The justice system didn't work alone. It never had the manpower. What it had was something stronger, the participation of everyone else. Because fear is contagious, and fear is obedient. You leave the church and walk toward the courthouse. A man sits on the steps, sharpening a small knife, not for crime, for bread. Still, he pauses when you look at him. His eyes flick to the constable down the street, then back to his blade. He puts it away. Not because you asked, but because he's learned what happens when people wonder what you're doing. In this world, appearance matters more than action. A guilty look can carry more weight than evidence. And fear teaches you to smile when you want to speak, to nod when you want to run. You meet a woman near the tailor's. She speaks carefully, eyes darting toward the door behind her. You ask if she remembers a time someone was punished unjustly. She snorts. "All of them," she says. "But don't write that down." Then she adds, "I watched my sister whipped for refusing to wear a bonnet on Sunday. Said it wasn't modest. The constable called it disruption. Said it set a bad example." You ask how her sister responded. "She didn't," the woman replies. "She bled." Then she learned to wear the bonnet. That's what fear does. It doesn't only punish the moment, it rewrites you. It edits your thoughts before you speak them. It makes obedience look like survival. And survival is all most people can afford. You head toward the schoolhouse next. The teacher is young, nervous. He hesitates before letting you in. Inside, children sit in rows, straight backs, clean nails, hands folded. You see the cane resting by the chalkboard. You ask how often it's used. "Less than before," he says. "More than I'd like." You ask what it teaches. "Discipline," he answers first. Then, after a pause, and silence. And suddenly the room feels heavier, because even here, among learning and childhood, fear is the language everyone understands. Later, you visit the jail again. A boy, maybe 16, sits in a cell. His wrists are bruised. He won't speak at first, just stares at the wall. You sit with him in silence for a long while. Then he whispers, "I didn't steal it." You ask what he's in for. "A ring," he says. "They said I took it, but I didn't." You ask why he didn't fight the charge. He looks at you finally, eyes hollow, skin pale. "Because they'd say I was lying." You ask if he's afraid. He nods, and then quietly, "Not of the punishment, of what happens after. Everyone will look at me like I deserved it." Fear outlives pain. It clings to reputation. It rewrites identity. And worst of all, it's invisible. You can't point to it like a scar. You can't clean it off like blood. You just carry it, inside your breath, your walk, your silence. And so, the people obey. Not because they agree, but because fear feels like safety, and disobedience feels like death. You walk the streets one more time before night falls. This time, you watch the watchers, the constables. They speak softly among themselves. They don't run. They don't yell. They barely gesture, because they don't need to. Fear does their work for them. You return to the square. The moon is high now, the stars smothered by fog, and the post stands empty. But still, No one lingers near it, not even in the quiet of night. You realize it's not the punishments that built this system. It's the expectation of them, the waiting, the watching, the endless unspoken threat that the whip is never far away. And that changes people, not just how they act, but how they think, how they hope, how they dream. Because in the 1800s, dreams were dangerous things. They made you want more, speak up, stand out. And that could get you hurt, or worse, noticed. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, and you wonder, if no one rebelled, was it peace? Or was it simply fear in perfect working order? You leave the square slowly, the post still behind you, but its shadow walks with you. As fear always does. The first time you hear it, you're not sure it's real. A high, short cry, not like a man's, not like a woman's, lighter, shriller, more sudden. You're standing near the edge of the market, watching a woman sell cloth when it slices through the morning air like a whip of its own. You follow the sound, down a side street, past the tannery, where the air is thick with vinegar and lime. Around a crumbling chapel wall, you find the source, a boy, no more than 10, hands tied to a post, shirt torn. A man, red-faced, uniformed, stands beside him, belt in hand. No platform, no crowd, but punishment, just the same. You hesitate, not because you doubt what you're seeing, but because your mind resists it. A child, and not in secret, not hidden away. This isn't discipline behind closed doors. It's public correction, scaled down in size, but not in intent. You step closer. The boy sees you, but doesn't cry again. His eyes are wet, his jaw clenched. You ask the man what the boy did. He doesn't look at you. Ran off. From the workhouse. The belt rises. The boy closes his eyes, and the punishment continues. This is how the 1800s treated children. Not as fragile, not as innocent, but as undeveloped adults, malleable, corruptible, punishable. If you were old enough to work, you were old enough to be beaten for avoiding it. If you could carry coal, you could be jailed for stealing it. And if you could talk back, or refuse, or question, then the world would show you how it handled disobedience. With force, with shame, with repetition. You head to the workhouse next. It looms at the edge of town, stone walls, narrow windows, chimneys coughing ash into a grey sky. Inside, rows of narrow beds, rows of even narrower children. You meet a girl sweeping the hallway. She's small, barefoot, hair shorn unevenly. You ask her age. 8, she says. You ask how long she's been here. She shrugs. As long as I remember. You ask what happens when she makes a mistake. Depends, she says. On what? On who sees it. In the laundry, a boy scrubs cloth with red hands, not from dye, from sores. He doesn't stop when you speak to him, just nods, just works. You ask what he did to be here. Nothing, he says. My father died. My mother begged. They took us both. Where is she now? In the women's wing, he says. I haven't seen her in weeks. Punishment for children wasn't a matter of criminality. It was proximity, vulnerability. If you were poor, you were already halfway condemned. And once you were inside the system, the workhouses, the industrial schools, the reformatories, the rest was routine. Wake, work, silence, strike, sleep, repeat. You read the ledger. Children assigned to coal mines, to chimney sweeping, to hauling carts, to sewing fine lace with bleeding fingers. Each misstep met with beatings, solitary confinement, or loss of food. Sometimes for crimes like idleness or cheerfulness. Yes, you read that right. Laughter was punished, because joy in such places was not just rare, it was suspect. You meet a man later, middle-aged now. He walks with a limp and smells of pipe smoke. He tells you about the school he grew up in, not a place of learning, but of discipline. They didn't teach us letters, he says. They taught us lines. Stand straight, don't blink, don't breathe too loud. You ask if he ever tried to run. Twice, he says. Once they caught him quickly. The second time they didn't find him for 3 days. When they did, they made an example of him. How? He lifts his shirt. Across his back, still, after all these years, a crosshatch of pale, raised scars. I was 9, he says. You walk home slowly that night, not from exhaustion, but because something in your chest feels fragile. Like the wind might break it open. The street is quiet. You pass a house with light in the window. A child laughs. For a moment you freeze, not out of fear, but out of contrast. That sound, so simple, so free, feels like defiance, a revolution in the dark. The next morning, you ask a magistrate why so many children were punished so harshly. He looks surprised. Harshly, he repeats. We discipline to protect. You ask who it protects. He doesn't answer, just taps a gavel on the table. As if that, somehow, is proof. And so you realize, the greatest cruelty wasn't the lash, or the labor, or even the hunger. It was the stealing of childhood. The insistence that you grow up not just fast, but afraid. That your earliest memory be not of play, but of punishment. Of being told, you are not innocent, you are not safe, and you will be shaped by pain, or discarded. You leave town a few days later, but not before seeing one last thing. A boy sits beneath the whipping post, not tied, not crying, just drawing something in the dirt with a stick. You kneel beside him. What is it? You ask. He shows you. It's a house, a sun, a bird, and a boy, smiling. You ask if that boy is him. He shrugs. Not yet, he says, then adds quietly, but maybe one day. And that is hope. Not loud, but alive. Even here, you've seen the lash. You've heard the silence that follows the snap of leather against skin. You've watched the scaffold emptied, then rebuilt, then emptied again. But today, the square looks different. Not because the post is gone, not because the sentence has changed, but because of who stands beneath it. A man, dark-skinned, silent. The crowd is larger than usual, not louder, just more present. There's a weight in the air, not just of punishment, but of spectacle. Not just justice, but hierarchy. And suddenly, it clicks. The crime wasn't what he did, it was who he was. You walk through the alleys that branch away from the heart of town, the ones people speak of carefully, if at all. They call it the quarters, or the fringe, or sometimes just there. It's where the black families live, the Irish, the Romani, the poor who speak with different tongues, worship in different ways, wear different fabrics. You knock on a door. A woman opens. Her eyes are tired but kind. Her hair is wrapped in cloth. Her voice is low. You ask about the man you saw earlier. She doesn't flinch. That's David, she says. He worked at the mill. They said he stole rope. Rope, can you believe it? From the floor, just scraps. You ask if he did it. She looks at you. You don't have to do it, she says. You just have to look like someone who might. That's the difference, isn't it? For the privileged, guilt had to be proven. For the poor, the foreign, the colonized, innocence had to be defended. And sometimes, even that wasn't enough. You visit the courthouse. Read the ledgers again. This time, you notice something you hadn't before. White man, 26, theft, fined and released. Black man, 22, same charge, flogged 30 lashes, imprisoned 3 months. Irish woman, 31, vagrancy, shipped to work colony. Local merchant's son, same, sent home to parents. Same crimes, different names. Radically different consequences, because the law wasn't blind. It was deeply, deliberately selective. You speak with a former constable. He's retired now. still wears the boots. He doesn't smile when he talks, but he speaks freely. You could see it in the way people walked, he says. Some knew they belonged. Others hoped not to be noticed. You ask if he ever questioned the orders. He shrugs. Wasn't my job to question, just to enforce. Then he adds, but it was always the same names, the same streets. We all knew what was expected. Expected, not written, not official, but understood. At the edge of town, near the rail tracks, you meet a man who once worked on the chain gang. He's thin now, shoulders bowed, voice gravelled. He tells you about the days spent breaking rocks for roads he wasn't allowed to walk freely, about sleeping chained to strangers, about getting sick and being told to keep digging. Why were you arrested? You ask. He smiles, a tired, sad thing. For being loud, he says. You ask if that's a metaphor. No, he says. I laughed too loud. Someone didn't like it. And it wasn't just race or class. It was proximity to power. The closer you were to it, by blood, by wealth, by skin, the softer the punishment. The further away, the harsher. In the colonies, it was worse still. In some places, people were beaten for not moving quickly enough when a soldier passed. In others, hung for inciting unrest, a phrase so broad it could mean anything from protest to prayer. In one record, you find this line: female, age unknown, accused of speaking out of turn during fieldwork. Sentence, 10 lashes and public display. Speaking. That was the crime, because power isn't afraid of violence, it's afraid of voice. You walk through the cemetery later, look at the headstones, so many unmarked, so many buried beneath numbers, not names, and you wonder, how many lives were erased before they could even begin? Not by death, but by policy, by punishment, by the quiet violence of being told, you don't matter, you are not ours. You are a lesson for others. Back in town, you pass a boy sweeping the front of a shop. He watches you watch him. You smile. He doesn't smile back. You ask his name. He tells you, then adds quickly, my father's a cobbler. We pay rent. We're good people. You hadn't accused him of anything, but he's already defending his right to exist, because he's learned that in this world, being harmless isn't enough. You have to prove it, again and again, every day. At night, the square is empty again. But you sit there anyway. You think of David and Mary and the chain gang and the quiet boy. You think of the punishment that never made it into the records, the daily fear of being next. And you understand. The whip left scars, but the hierarchy taught silence. And that silence? It lives longer than rope, louder than verdicts, heavier than chains. It becomes legacy. It becomes shame. It becomes the kind of fear passed down like a family heirloom. Unwanted, unspoken, unbroken, until someone, somewhere, dares to name it again. You hear it before you see it. A hymn, soft and slow, rising from behind stone walls as the first light of morning splits the mist. Not joyful, not quite mournful, just steady, like breathing in a cold room, like memory wrapped in incense. You follow the sound. It leads you to a chapel, not grand, not with stained glass or golden arches, but functional. Square, grey. A building meant more to contain than to inspire. This is where the prisoners come on Sunday, and sometimes after punishment, and sometimes before execution. It is the chapel of the condemned, and the prayer today is for the guilty, or so they say. You step inside. The room is nearly empty, 2 rows of pews, a cracked wooden pulpit, a cross nailed slightly askew, and behind it, a priest with a voice like dust. He reads from a book that's older than most of the walls in town. His fingers don't tremble. He's done this before. He's baptized the bound, blessed the broken, whispered verses over backs still bleeding from the whip. You sit in the back, you watch, and you begin to understand. Religion in the 1800s didn't stand apart from punishment. It was tied to it, woven through it, used to explain it, to justify it, to bless it, and sometimes, just sometimes, to comfort those left in its wake. The priest finishes reading. He closes the book, then walks down the center aisle and takes a seat beside a man in rags. They sit together in silence. No sermon, no judgment, just presence. And for a moment, it feels real, human. You approach slowly. The priest looks at you. He knows why you're here. You ask him if he believes punishment is divine. He sighs, then says, "No, but people believe it is. And sometimes that's enough." You walk with him later through the graveyard. He tells you stories as you pass the headstones. This one stole bread. That one stabbed a man. That one was sentenced because he looked like someone else. He knows their names. He remembers their confessions. He remembers their silences more. You'd be surprised how many still asked for forgiveness, he says. You ask if he granted it. "I'm not the one who can," he replies. You ask if they believed they deserved it. He stops walking, looks out at the fog settling over the graves. "Some did," he says. "Some didn't. But they all hoped." Hope. That's what religion gave to many in that century. Not protection from punishment, but a way to endure it. A reason to believe there was something more beyond the rope, beyond the lash, beyond the shame. Because when the world took everything else, family, freedom, name, God was what remained. And so the Bible was placed in cells. Hymns were sung at executions. Verses were read over bruised bodies and broken bones. And whether it soothed or seared, that depended on the voice reading it. You meet a woman named Agnes. She runs a mission house near the harbour. She gives bread to the poor, bandages to the punished, and prayers to those too tired to ask. You ask her why she does it. She shows you the scar on her wrist. "Public disgrace," she says. "I was caught kissing a sailor. They tied me to a post and left me there until I fainted. When I woke up, I found God." You ask what he said. "He said I could still matter," she answers. But it wasn't always comfort. Sometimes the church, like the law, was a weapon. In some places, priests led the charge to punish the immoral. Women were burned for witchcraft well into the early 1800s in parts of Europe. Boys were beaten in schools run by clergy for sins they didn't understand. Confessions were demanded, not for forgiveness, but for surveillance. And sermons reminded everyone that hell wasn't a metaphor. It was a place that looked very much like the world outside their door. You read a passage in an old religious tract. It says, "He who steals with his hand must feel the weight of heaven's judgment through the rod of man." The rod of man, sanctioned by heaven. A divine right to beat, to hang, to strip, to shame. And you realize, sometimes, faith didn't stop the hand that swung the whip. It sharpened it. But still, you also see the other side. The quiet rebel priests who smuggled food to prisoners. The nuns who risked excommunication to shelter fugitives. The monks who wrote letters for those who could no longer hold a pen. You meet one, Brother Thomas, in a cloister by the hill. He tends a garden. The soil under his nails is darker than his robe. He tells you he once refused to bless an execution. They stripped him of his collar. He simply kept wearing the robe. He says, if they die, let them die with someone beside them. You ask if that helped. He nods, but his eyes are distant, as if still watching someone swing. At night, you walk by the chapel again. Inside, a single candle burns. You see a man kneeling, alone. You don't enter. You don't need to. You know what he's asking for. Not freedom, not innocence, just peace. And that, in the end, was the role of religion for many in the 1800s. Not a shield, but a pillow. Not a sword, but a sigh. A way to breathe through the weight of a world that punished too quickly and forgave too slowly. A whisper in the dark. You are more than what they've done to you. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to carry someone one more day. Some punishments fade, others echo. And then there are those that never really leave at all. Not because the crime was grand or the person was famous, but because the moment was so sharp, so visceral, that it carved itself into the memory of everyone who saw it, and even those who only heard the tale. Today, you collect those stories. Not from books, but from voices, from doorways and benches, from taverns and corridors, from people who begin their sentence with, "You didn't hear it from me, but..." You start in a small town just past the fields, where the fog sits low and stubborn on the ground. There, you meet an old woman, name long forgotten, or perhaps deliberately lost. She remembers a punishment from her youth. She tells it like a lullaby, like a confession. "There was a girl named Lottie," she says. "Not much older than me at the time. They said she hexed a cow." You pause. "A cow?" She nods. "It got sick. Someone blamed her. Said she looked at it funny. Said she was wild. You know the type. Hair too long, never went to church, always walking in the woods." You ask what they did. "They made her stand in the square barefoot, with thorns tied into her dress. All day, from sun-up to moonrise." You ask what happened after. "She left," the woman says. "Or maybe she died. I don't know." But every spring, a bouquet shows up at the edge of that post. No one ever sees who leaves it. In another village, they still tell the story of a man named Calder, a blacksmith, big, loud, drank too much. One night, he insulted a constable's daughter. No one remembers what he said, but they remember what happened next. Dragged from his shop at dawn. No trial. They took him to the riverbank, chained him to a cart, and marched him through town barefoot while children threw stones. Then came the whipping. 30 lashes, bare skin, on his knees. When they were done, they made him kiss the constable's boots. He never spoke again. Not a word. Lived 10 more years in the village, hammering in silence. They say his forge never burned the same. Some stories are shorter. A boy accused of stealing a silver spoon, hung with no witnesses. A woman who tried to hide her pregnancy, jailed, then forced to scrub the church floor for months with a rag soaked in lye. A teacher who let his students read a banned book, flogged, dismissed, forbidden to teach again. You walk through these tales like a museum with no walls. Pain framed in memory. Shame hung like portraits. Silence preserved like antique dust. One man, a merchant now well into his 70s, tells you of a punishment he saw at age 12. "I was selling apples," he begins, "and a man ran past and fast, desperate. Behind him, 3 guards. He was bleeding already. I don't know why. Maybe they caught him earlier." You ask what he did. "No one ever said," the man replies. "But they caught him in the square, beat him till he didn't move, then tied his arms to the whipping post. Not to whip, to hang. Arms up, weight pulling down, all night. You ask what happened in the morning. They cut him down," he says, "then fined his mother for public disruption." You sit with that for a long time, the fact that punishment extended beyond the punished. That pain wasn't just physical, it was financial, spiritual, hereditary, because that's the hidden side of these stories. Punishment didn't end with the sentence. It infected families, it stained reputations, it passed down like illness. Children grew up under its shadow. Spouses carried it like a second name. Communities learned to police themselves just to avoid the spectacle of another whipping. And some told the stories. Not to warn, not even to remember, but to keep the pain from becoming too small. In the town of Whitmere, they still talk about a woman named Sibylla. She was a midwife, beloved, trusted. Then one baby died during birth. It happens. It always has. But this time, they wanted someone to blame. So they blamed her. The punishment wasn't physical, it was social. No one spoke to her again. Not her neighbors, not her church, not her own children. They walked past her house in silence, left her bread on the stoop. Never made eye contact. She died 2 years later, alone, under a quilt she stitched with her own name. The last thing she ever made. It was buried with her. And then there are the stranger stories, the ones that blend punishment with superstition. A thief made to walk the cemetery with a lantern on his head. A woman chained to a bell tower during a storm to shake the demons out. A baker who lost his license for adding spices to bread, considered unnatural temptations. You think they can't be true, but then you read the old trial records and realize they are. And what do these stories have in common? It isn't always the crime. It isn't always the cruelty. It's the echo, the way they stayed, not just as memory, but as structure. These stories were passed down not as cautionary tales, but as rules, invisible fences. Don't dress too brightly. Don't speak too freely. Don't walk alone at night. Don't question authority. Don't forget who watches. Because if you do, remember what happened to Sibylla, to Calder, to Lottie. You leave the last house just before dusk. The old man who told you the final tale shuts the door behind you. He'd whispered it, even though you were alone. You understand why. Because some stories, once told aloud, become real again. And real things carry weight, so you walk slowly, carefully, not just because of the path, but because you're carrying centuries of pain wrapped in rumor. And they're heavier than you expected. You stand in the crowd again. But today, you're not looking at the scaffold, not at the condemned, not at the noose, the whip, the block. Today, you turn around. You look at the faces watching, the audience, the ones who always came. And suddenly, you begin to realize punishment in the 1800s was never just about the guilty. It was a performance written for the innocent. And the crowd, they were not just witnesses. They were the purpose. The first thing you notice is the children, so many of them, holding their mother's skirt, sitting on their father's shoulders, clutching scraps of bread between fingers already calloused from work. Some stare, some cry, some are stone silent, their faces unreadable, too young to process, too old to forget. You ask a man nearby why he brought his daughter. He doesn't blink. She needs to learn. Learn what? That the world has rules. And what happens if they're broken? He nods toward the scaffold. This is what you begin to see. The punishment isn't the act. It's the memory it creates in those who watched. The snapping rope, the moan after the 12th lash, the blood soaking into cloth. These things settle inside the spectator, especially the young, like seeds. They grow into habits, into hesitations, into obedience that doesn't need to be enforced anymore, because it's been planted too deep to question. You meet a woman near the bakery. She's elderly now, slouched, wrinkled in a way that looks like folded paper. She tells you she saw a hanging when she was 7. Didn't sleep for a week, she says. Then she adds, "But I never stole, not once, not even when I was hungry." You ask if that was worth it. She doesn't answer, just turns her face away from the sun. And so you start to ask yourself, what does a child learn when they watch a body fall? They learn that the system is powerful, that the law has no face, only hands, that suffering isn't private, that shame is public, that survival depends on being quiet, small, invisible. They learn that safety isn't a right, it's a performance, and those who fail to perform, they are punished. Loudly, with an audience. You sit near a group of teenagers later in the day. They laugh, push each other, spit. But when a constable walks by, they all go still. Not out of guilt, but out of training. You ask them if they've ever seen a punishment. Once, says the tallest boy. Last year, man stole a cow. They whipped him until he couldn't walk. You ask how it made him feel. He shrugs. I felt sorry, he says. Then adds, after a pause, but I haven't stolen a thing since. That's the equation, isn't it? Sorrow plus spectacle. Obedience. A currency paid in bruises that buys the illusion of order. But not everyone watched willingly. You meet a mother, young, frantic. She holds her child close. You saw her earlier, near the post. You ask why she didn't turn away. I wanted to, she says. But my husband said the boy needed to see it. Said he'd grow soft if he didn't. You ask what she thinks. I don't want my son to be afraid, she whispers. But I think he already is. And then there were the cheerers. Yes, they existed too. Those who shouted when the trap door opened, who laughed when the condemned wept, who made jokes about the hangman's knot. You find one in the tavern, a man with ale on his breath and a grin that doesn't quite reach his eyes. You ask why he cheers. Because someone has to, he says. You ask what he means. If we don't laugh, he says, we remember, and remembering hurts. You begin to understand something deeper. The audience isn't just watching a punishment. They're performing too, performing strength, performing agreement, performing control. Because to express horror, disgust, sympathy, that's dangerous. That's how you become suspicious. That's how someone starts asking about your loyalties. So you learn to watch with stillness, with blankness, or with the right kind of noise, the laugh, the cheer, the nod, and you survive. You read a school book left behind on a bench. Inside, the handwriting is small and clean. One line reads, "We watched a man die today. The teacher said it would help us understand justice." You close the book. And you think of the classroom, of the rows of desks, of the cane by the blackboard, and you realize education and punishment were never far apart, because both were meant to shape, to mold, to discipline, and both relied on watching. You find a bench near the square and sit with an old man who says he's seen more executions than he has birthdays. You ask why he keeps coming. He chuckles. Habit, he says, or maybe guilt. You ask guilt for what? For not looking away sooner, he says. As night falls, you're left with a question that won't settle. What happens to a soul that watches too much pain? Does it grow stronger? Or does it harden? Does it learn? Or does it forget how to feel? And more importantly, what does it teach a society when it turns punishment into a public event? The answer hangs in the silence, like a body on a rope, like a scar across memory, like a child learning the wrong lesson at the wrong time and never forgetting it. You arrive in the colony by boat. The harbour smells of salt and sweat. Ropes creak against the docks. Voices blend, French, English, Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish. But over them all, there's a rhythm you recognize now. The rhythm of control. It doesn't shout, it commands. And you understand, punishment here is not a shadow of Europe. It is its reflection, enlarged, darkened, sharpened by distance. Because in the colonies, power had no counterweight. No press, no protest, no one watching. You step onto dry land and feel the heat rise beneath your boots. Not just from the sun, but from the way everything here seems tighter, tenser, as if the land itself remembers what's been done to it. And you begin to see it everywhere. In the way guards carry their rifles like exclamation points. In the way the locals lower their eyes when they pass. In the way every building, every street name, every fence whispers, "This is not yours." You meet a man named Ismael, born here. Raised under flag and chain, he walks with a limp, not from age, but from something older, something institutional. He tells you about the whipping tree. It still stands. A twisted old giant with roots like knuckles. They brought the punished here, stripped, bound, lashed until the bark turned red. No scaffold, no post, just nature, used like a weapon. You ask how often it happened. He smiles, without warmth. Every week, sometimes more. You ask what the crimes were. Breathing wrong. Standing tall. Speaking our language. You sit beside the tree that afternoon. Its shade is cool, but you feel no peace beneath it. You run your hand along the bark. Deep grooves where the rope bit deep. Faint stains that never fully washed away. And beneath it all, silence. Not of rest, but of obedience forced by generations of fear. Punishment in the colonies was not about law. It was about reminder. It reminded the colonized that their bodies were not their own, that their freedom was conditional, that mercy was foreign, that justice wore the wrong color. You walk through the town, once built by hands that bled. The courthouse still stands. A plaque on the wall says, Justice and Order, 1847. You step inside and find records, names, sentences, a ledger of suffering so vast it barely fits on the pages. Adama, age 22, speaking against overseer, 40 lashes, labor reassignment. Camilla, age 17, caught with book in native language, 1 week in isolation. Julian, age 30, failure to bow, public flogging, shackled 2 days. Unnamed child, estimated age 10, missing morning roll call. Solitary confinement. No trials, no lawyers, no defense, just verdicts in ink and scars in flesh. And it wasn't just punishment, it was ritual. You meet a teacher, once forbidden to teach her own tongue. She tells you of the punishments designed to erase not crime, but culture. Children forced to kneel on rice for speaking ancestral words. Women shaved bald for practicing traditional ceremonies. Men whipped for wearing native colors. Punishment as erasure, as colonization of the soul. You ask how they resisted. She doesn't speak. She sings. Low. A lullaby in a language you don't understand, but you feel it in your chest. It is not a song of defeat. It is survival in melody. Later, you walk past a field. You think it's empty. Then you see it. A row of stones. Unmarked. The punishment wasn't recorded here, just buried. The ones who disappeared, not executed, officially, just gone, taken at night, punished in places where trees don't talk, where ground swallows secrets. You kneel beside one of the stones. The earth is warm, too warm. You whisper a name, any name, and hope it reaches someone. You leave the town and follow a dirt road into the hills. At its end, a village. Small, quiet, alive. The people there remember. They don't forget the punishments. They pass them down, but they don't let them define them. They show you a carving, in wood, worn smooth. It shows a figure tied, arms stretched, but behind them, wings. Not angelic, but real. Torn, scarred, but lifting. You ask what it means. A boy, no older than 8, answers. It means we still get up. You return to the harbour at sunset. The water shimmers like old silver. The wind carries voices, laughter, prayer, singing, and pain too. But here, pain doesn't whisper. It builds into rhythm, into resistance, into remembrance. Because punishment in the colonies wasn't just brutal. It was designed to break generations. But what it didn't count on was how those generations would remember, how they would sing the names, bury the silence, lift the wings, and tell the stories, so that one day justice might look different than it did beneath that tree. You are back where you started, but the world around you has changed. Not the streets. They're still cobbled, the air still damp. The building still leaning slightly forward as if listening. Not the trees, though the leaves have shifted colour. What changed is your eyes. Because now you see not just what was done, but what was left behind. Today, the scaffold is gone. The post is gone. The rope is gone. But the system, the shape, the rhythm, still here. Different name, different tools, same silence. You walk into the courthouse. It's been modernized. Electric lights buzz softly overhead. Desks hum with the low drone of computers. Papers in folders, not chains in corners. A young man waits for his name to be called. He stares at the wall. His fingers twitch on his knee. You ask why he's here. They said I missed my appointment, he says, the one they never sent. You ask what the punishment is. Jail, he replies. Again. You look at the clerk's desk, a pile of files, and under one of them a thin wooden gavel, nothing loud, just final. Outside, you visit the prison. The gates open with a buzz. Inside, concrete, glass, white paint already peeling. No stocks, no whips, just time and space and silence. You walk the halls, see the faces, hear the echo of shoes on polished floors, see cameras, see rules. And then you see the truth. The past didn't vanish. It adapted. You meet a man named Curtis. He's been out for 3 months, 34 years old, arrested for disruption of peace, spent 9 months behind bars. He shows you the fine print. Disruption meant singing too loud in public after 10 p.m. You ask if he's angry. He laughs. No, anger's a privilege. You ask what he is. He thinks for a long time, then says, I'm awake. You walk with him. He tells you the names of friends. Some made it out, some didn't. Not because of the sentence, because of the echo. Once they mark you, he says, you never walk the same again. And that's the part the old punishment understood and perfected. Not just to hurt, but to linger. You walk into a classroom later that week. The teacher reads a lesson on justice. An eye for an eye, she says, then adds quickly, of course we don't believe that now. But something in the way she says it makes you wonder if we do. Not literally, but structurally. You see it in the zero-tolerance policies, in the cuffs placed on children, in the way one mistake becomes a record becomes a sentence becomes a shadow. You sit in a park watching teenagers pass. Some wear uniforms, some wear tags, some laugh like nothing can touch them. But you hear one say to another, if they catch me again, I'm done. He doesn't say what he did, doesn't need to. The others nod. They understand. Because punishment isn't always a surprise anymore. Sometimes it's a certainty, just waiting for a reason. Later, you read statistics. You don't want to, but you do. Incarceration rates double what they were a century ago. Marginalized communities sentenced at triple the rate for identical crimes. Juveniles tried as adults for acts of poverty. You read them like scars on paper. You wonder how many began with a missing meal, or a moment of anger, or a system that forgot how to forgive. And suddenly, you remember Thomas, the boy from long ago, hanged for stealing bread. And you realize he's still here. Different name, different corner. Same crime, being born without a net. You visit a museum on your last day in town. There's a display about historical punishment, photos, documents, a preserved whip behind glass. A child walks by tugging their mother's hand. Did they really do that? The child asks. The mother pauses, then says, not anymore. You want to believe her, but you remember the cell, the echo, the paperwork that never ends. And you wonder, maybe the whip changed forms. Maybe the scaffold found new foundations. Maybe the system just learned how to smile while it tightens. At night, you write it down. Pain evolves, not away, but forward, from rope to report, from post to policy, from spectacle to silence. But something else remains too, the memory, the resistance, the boy drawing wings in the dirt, the girl singing through tears, The man who still walks, even with chains on his past. The people who remember and tell. Because if the system adapts, so does hope. The wind shifts. You notice it the moment you step back into the square. No scaffold, no crowd, no shouting, just wind. It rustles the cloth on market stalls, sways the ropes on empty carts, stirs the ash where torches once burned. The punishments are over, for now. But the silence they left behind is anything but quiet. It lives in the walls, in the way people glance sideways, in how everyone moves a little faster near the old whipping post. This silence isn't peace, it's residue, ashes of memory. Echoes of screams long since swallowed by stone. You realize the post may be gone, but the story isn't finished. Because what happens after the punishment? That's what you're here to find out. You begin with a name. Mira. They say she survived 2 years in the workhouse, accused of stealing a crust of bread. The guards didn't believe her when she said it had been discarded. She's out now, living near the edge of town, far from where anyone with a title might walk. You find her hanging laundry. She doesn't startle, just looks at you, eyes quiet, unforgiving, not cruel, but used to pain being closer than kindness. You ask how she is. She shrugs. Alive. You ask if she dreams. Sometimes. You ask what of. That I still belong to myself. You stand in silence. She hands you a clothespin, as if to say, help or leave. You help. Later, you sit beneath the same tree where the old constables used to rest between lashings. Children now play near its base. One ties a string around the trunk. The other laughs when the knot slips. You think of all the knots tied to people who couldn't laugh, who only screamed. You ask an elder nearby if he remembers when punishments were public. He nods once. I saw my brother whipped. He was 12. You ask what for. He climbed a fence, that's all. You ask what happened after. He never climbed again. Not fences, not ladders, not out of the hole they left in him. You look up at the sky where crows trace lazy circles. And you wonder, how many people stop climbing because of fear planted in their backs? The old tailor still keeps a ledger of punishments, not official ones, personal. He pulls it from under a loose floorboard and opens it slowly, reverently. Names, dates, injuries, besides some names, small notes. Didn't speak for weeks. Refused to eat bread again. Started singing in sleep. Built puppets out of straw. Said they didn't hurt. You ask why he kept this. He looks at you, voice almost breaking. Because if I didn't, they'd vanish. Then you meet Renato. He was once the public crier, the man who read out punishments aloud, who stood beside the magistrates and turned guilt into theatre. He doesn't do that anymore. Now he tends bees. You ask if he regrets what he did. He doesn't answer. Instead, he leads you to his hives, shows you how the bees move. They don't sting unless you press too hard. You nod, unsure of the metaphor. He says, that was the lie they taught us. That punishment was just consequence, natural, fair, but most people weren't stinging, they were just breathing. You walk past a schoolhouse. The bell rings. Children run. One boy stumbles and grazes his knee. The teacher hurries to help, not with scolding, but with balm. You see it and feel something shift, because this is new. This is what wasn't there before. A hand, not raised, but offered. You speak with the teacher after class. She says, they used to teach us that discipline had to hurt, that obedience needed fear, but now we teach memory. You ask what kind. The kind that doesn't rot. That turns grief into something useful. That night in a tavern, you hear someone sing. Not a ballad, not a hymn, but something raw, a story put to melody. About a boy who ran from the gallows and built a house from the planks meant to hang him. The room falls silent. Then someone claps, then another. Soon everyone's hands are moving, not to strike, but to remember. You ask the singer where the song came from. He says, "From my father. He didn't survive, but his voice did." So that's what this chapter is about, isn't it? Survival. Not perfect, not clean, but real. Scraped together from broken ribs and whispered names and quilts sewn with defiance. The system was built to erase. But these people, they wrote themselves back in. With songs, with gardens, with stitches, with bees. And you carry their names now, not as burdens, but as blueprints for how a society might be rebuilt, how justice might soften, how mercy might stop being the exception and become the expectation. You whisper into the wind, "I see you." And somewhere, across time, across ash, across echoes, you know someone hears it. It begins with a question. Not yours, theirs. A child, no more than 10, tugs on their grandmother's sleeve as you pass a bakery still warm with morning bread. "Why does Papa never laugh?" The grandmother pauses, then whispers, "Because his father didn't either." You don't stop walking, but the words follow you, because they are not just an answer. They are a door, and today you walk through it. You visit a family home just outside the edge of town. Stone walls, a crooked fence, a garden that grows, despite the ground. Inside, 3 generations live in near silence. You ask if you can speak with them. They agree, not because they're eager, but because something in their posture suggests they've been waiting for this moment. The father, Joran, stares at the fireplace even when he speaks. You ask about his childhood. He hesitates. Then, "I learned to flinch before I learned to read." His mother, Dahlia, folds her hands tightly. She doesn't speak at first, then simply says, "We were taught that love comes after discipline." The child, Emil, looks between them both and asks again, "But what if you never stop being punished?" You visit other homes, some with paintings on the walls, others with old scars in the wood. You see patterns, rooms where no one raises their voice, not out of peace, but fear. Tables where apologies come before meals. Eyes that dart to corners when a door closes too quickly. You meet Arlen, a blacksmith's son. He says his grandfather was beaten in the square for refusing to bow. Now Arlen walks with a slight stoop, though no one ever told him to. He says, "Some lessons teach themselves, through blood, through posture." You ask if he plans to pass that lesson on. He looks at his own child, asleep in his arms. "Only if I fail." In the archives, you read a record of corporal punishment spanning 80 years. You begin to notice something more insidious than pain. Repetition. Names repeating across generations. Same family names. Same neighborhoods. Same charges. Same punishments. It's not justice, it's inheritance. You begin to chart it, draw lines between names. What emerges is not a tree, but a chain, forged in silence, hardened by obedience. And yet, there are broken links. You meet Thera, whose great-grandmother died in a cell. Thera works in a library now. She holds up a book, gently. She couldn't read. I teach people to. She tells you she changed her name at 17. Not to forget, but to rebuild. You ask how it feels. She presses the book to her chest, like breathing a different kind of air. In a school, a teacher asks her students to write letters, not to Santa, not to officials, but to their ancestors. One child writes, "I forgive you for hitting my father." Another, "I still hear you in the hallway." And one, folded perfectly, "We will rest now, I promise." The teacher hangs them like prayer flags. Wind blows gently through the window. You sit again in the square. A boy approaches you. He holds a stick, draws a line in the dirt. "Do you think it's true," he asks, "that people can change the world by remembering?" You ask him what he remembers. My mother's voice when she tells me stories. And you realize that's what healing begins with. Not justice in the courtroom, not policies alone, but stories, shared, heard, written, lived differently, because trauma doesn't end when the pain stops. It ends when the story changes, when the next line written isn't born from silence, but from voice. And Section 19, that's what it becomes, a page rewritten, not in fear, but in hope. You arrive at dusk. The road back is familiar now, curved in memory, paved in ash. It winds through fields you once walked with eyes wide, not yet knowing how deep the roots of punishment grew here. You reach the town square and stop, not because it looks different. It doesn't. The stones are the same. The wind still carries the scent of old wood and new bread. The church bell still rings at 1/2 the hour. But you are different, and that changes everything. You pass the place where the post once stood. Gone now, replaced by a patch of wildflowers, not neatly arranged, not ceremonial, just growing, resilient, untamed. You kneel, brush the petals with your fingers, and feel the past pressing through the dirt. You whisper, "I remember," and the wind answers, not with words, but with quiet, as if memory itself is listening. You walk to the house of the first person you spoke to here, the woman selling cloth, the one who ignored the boy's screams the first time. She's still there, older, bent now, but her eyes still sharp. She recognizes you, offers you tea, says, "You've been away." You nod. You ask what changed. She points to the wall, where a small paper is pinned beside the doorway. It reads, "We do not call the post justice. We do not call silence peace." She says, "That boy you saw, he's grown now. Works in the bakery, has a wife, 2 girls. Still doesn't say much, but he laughs." You ask how she feels about that. She closes her eyes for a moment. Relieved, then adds, "Ashamed, but relieved." In the center of town, there's a new statue, not of a judge, not a soldier, not a ruler, but of a child, seated, drawing in the dirt. You recognize him, the boy with the stick, the wings, the house in the mud. The plaque reads, "To the ones who imagined more." Children play near it now. None of them flinch when someone raises their voice. None of them lower their eyes when a constable walks by. You feel something loosen in your chest. That night, you attend a reading. A hall once used for sentencing has been turned into a library. No judge, no gavel, just stories. People sit in a circle. Each one stands in turn and reads. A poem about a girl who kept singing. A letter from a prisoner to his unborn daughter. A memory of standing at the edge of a crowd and choosing not to cheer. When your turn comes, you read from your notebook the stories of David, of Sibylla, of the post, the boy, the chains. You finish, and the room is silent. Then someone stands and says, "I knew her, the one who made the quilts. She saved my mother's hands." Another, "That song, my brother sings it in the fields." And another, "I never saw the punishments, but I felt them. This helps me name them." You realize you didn't just collect stories, you returned them. And now they are part of something larger, the final morning. You walk through town again, slow, unhurried. You stop to tie a ribbon around the base of the statue, a small one, red. No name, just a gesture, a thread, a thank you. You see a girl watching. She asks, "Was that for you?" You smile. "No, for someone I met long ago." She thinks, then nods. "I'll make one too." You leave town on foot. Same road, same sky. But behind you, something different rises. Not justice, not yet, but the shape of it, the possibility of it. And in your chest, not grief, not quite, but something that hums like it. Responsibility. Because remembering isn't the end. It's the first mercy. And telling the story again, that's how you make sure the post never stands again.